On the one hand, you have Donald Trump saying that Iran is running out of time for striking a deal. This after no mention of diplomacy, quote unquote, or anything like this during the U.S. and Israeli-backed riots. And what's so interesting about someone like Marco Rubio, as he is testifying, I won't play the video. He was testifying in front of Congress. He said that there are 30 to 40,000 U.S. troops at risk in the Middle East because they are within range of Iranian missiles. And as he's doing this, saying this, he's making the case that this is why the U.S. needs to stay in the Middle East. And this is why the U.S. needs to escalate with Iran. CNN, they had this huge report. Do you notice the headlines are all the same? Wounded, but still dangerous. How Iran could strike back. Iran has thousands of missiles and drones within range of U.S. troops, as Rubio said, and has threatened to strike them, as well as Israel. You have Iran able to, with possibly thousands, likely thousands of missiles, reach the entire Middle East, reach everything that the U.S. has. Shouldn't the United States be worried?
Trump is obviously not America first. I think that's probably the most important thing that we notice here. And MAGA, obviously, has, contrary to what we were led to believe, doesn't actually have a problem with killing white blonde women or white men or killing people who bear arms, or they don't seem to have a problem with Epstein or the Epstein class, unlike what we thought was the case a year ago around now. So there's not really much that one can say about Trump, about his supporters in this regard. They apparently will move in any direction that the Israelis want him to move, or at least the Zionists want him to move. And I mean the Zionists, meaning the Zionist, broader Zionist movement, Christian Zionists, Jewish Zionists, but many of them are based in the United States, Adelson being one of them. So if these people were worried about U.S. interests, of course they wouldn't attack Iran. War, of course, is horrible, and I live here, and obviously, if there is war, I would probably again have to go to a place where there's an internet connection, and I would probably myself be, or my family will be wondering what would be my fate. Right. So I recognize what war is. I don't take it lightly.
Yeah.
But of course, it would be a war that Iran would have to fight, right, because you cannot appease a monster like Trump or Netanyahu or any other of these neocons and Zionists who have been carrying out and continue to carry out a genocide in Gaza and in Lebanon and elsewhere, and support ISIS. And we just saw thousands of ISIS members being freed in Syria by one of two allies of the United States. Either the Kurdish forces freed them or the Al-Qaeda government freed them. In either case, they're American allies. So we all know that this was in U.S. interest to have all these thousands of people released, and it's probably they're going to be used to put pressure on countries like Iraq or maybe on the resistance in Lebanon. So it's not reasonable, it's not logical, but it could help. It could happen. A war would be devastating for the world. This is something that most people don't recognize. But if there is no gasoline, if there's no oil or natural gas from the Persian Gulf region or from the Red Sea or from the Caucasus, that would mean that prices would go through the roof. And some Americans seem to think that since the United States is energy independent, that'll make a big difference. It won't. It'll make a big difference to those shareholders of those companies that are producing gasoline. But for the consumer, that consumer is going to pay the price that everyone else across the world is paying with the new price of oil and natural gas because of the shortages. So using your automobile, keeping factories running, keeping industries working, AI needing so much energy, and this is going to change things dramatically. So it's not a smart thing. It's not in the interest of the United States. It will be catastrophic for the United States and the rest of the world, and for me, and for Iranians. But this is the balance of terror. This is what Iran has to prevent war. It's sort of like the Soviet Union and the United States both having nuclear weapons during the Cold War was called mutual assured destruction. In a sense, this is the fate of the world lies in the hands of Washington. But the problem is that Washington and the people around Trump and in Congress, they are Israel firsters. And many of them are willing to sacrifice the United States and the rest of the world for the Israeli regime. That's just how it is. So reason and logic are useful up to a point. But for some people, it's all about emotions, it's about power, it's about ethno-supremacism, it's about supremacism. So I believe that a war is quite possible, despite the fact that any sane person in the White House, if there are any, would tell Trump that this is a terrible idea.
Iran has these capabilities, which allow it to, if the next strike it has to launch occurs, if it is attacked and it launches its defensive strike, it could indeed wipe away. It might be attritional in some respects because the U.S., it'll be a back and forth, but they have the capabilities to do this. But even the big problem here, as you said, is that once that happens and once the oil markets go haywire, this directly affects the U.S. military itself. The U.S. military is one of the biggest consumers of oil in the world. It's certainly the biggest consumer of oil in the United States. I think federal spending on oil, it's something 70-80% of all oil spending happens for the U.S. military. And that means the U.S. military is going to be heavily affected. 100 million barrels of oil per year, Professor Marandi. And I don't think domestic production is going to make up for this in the midst of a war. So anyway, your reactions to this, because yes, Iran can hit back hard and will, and then the longer it goes on, the more that the U.S. is going to have to face, the empire will have to face this mutually assured destruction that it has kind of laid for itself. It's a position it wasn't in decades and decades ago, but it's in it now.
Yes, and going back to what I said at the beginning, this whole project was pre-planned. The currency manipulation, we now know from the Secretary of Treasury at Davos that he carried it out intentionally as an act of war against Iran. We now know through the admissions of the Israelis or the gloating of the Israelis that they were involved in killing the hundreds of police officers and many other hundreds of innocent people. The Western media has been lying about numbers. They said there's no internet, but during the period when there was no communication, they were talking about having all these numbers. They're just making it up. And who was making it up? Like these so-called human rights organizations based in the United States, the same human rights organizations that are always there whenever the US government needs them to wage some sort of war or aggression. So all of these, and of course, as I said, the Iranian government has yesterday stated and will soon carry out, they'll soon declare all the names and with their ID numbers to make it very clear. But that's not going to change Western media because they're part of a project. As I said, there's no difference between the Guardian and the Independent and the Times, or the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal. They're all one and the same when it comes to empire. Some may say, it's not a good idea to do this, even though they're evil and they deserve it. The other will say, no, let's go for it. They're all the same. But so this was a project to get us here. And that's why I think there's a good chance that it will happen. Do I believe that means it will happen? No, I don't know if it will happen. No one can say for certain. But Iran would be foolish not to be planning for all-out war, and that's what it has done. Yet, again, when you look at all the numbers, it's a bad idea. Trump wants to make the U.S. military stronger. He's going to weaken it. and he's going to destroy his own military capabilities, the country's economic capabilities at a time when the U.S. economy is doing very poorly and the country is deeply divided. And and at a time when the rest of the world is sick and tired of the United States anyway, the U.S. government.
Mm.
But who knows? We can't say for certain anything because it's Trump. But one thing that I would also like to add is that you mentioned a couple of times in two articles where they said a weakened Iran or battered
Right.
Iran, or I don't know what.
Yep.
But the fact is that no, Iran today is far more prepared for war than it was 8 months ago.
Right.
Iran learned a lot from the war that the U.S. and the Israelis carried out because it hadn't fought a war since Saddam Hussein invaded the country at the behest of the West.
Right.
When the West gave him chemical weapons. One of the most disgraceful people is the German chancellor. I mean, all German chancellors are somehow more disgraceful than others.
Yes, this is true.
I have never heard a German chancellor once mention how they gassed Iranians in the 1980s, how I was gassed, how my friends were gassed with German chemical weapons.
Mm.
They were the ones who carried out these crimes. Yet the German regime, this fascistic regime, is constantly insulting Iranians.
Yep.
And it's stunning how racist it is. People are still, as we speak, Danny, as we speak, people are still dying of chemical weapons because it can be a very slow death. It eats your, it destroys your lungs gradually. Even though I've survived 2 chemical attacks, I wasn't injured badly, so I didn't go down that road. But the brother of a friend of mine, actually a colleague of mine in a department that I'm an affiliate to, his brother died of chemical weapons just a few years ago. So he was injured in the 1980s and he just went downhill. Imagine the torture he went. And then this disgusting regime in Germany, has the audacity to talk about Iran. They should just shut their mouths and mind their own business because their economy has hit a brick wall already. But sometimes people should go and look at the images of the dying Iranians and the Iraqis. Saddam Hussein used those chemical weapons against his own people, and no one in the West ever said anything about it. The first time chemical weapons became an issue was when Saddam invaded Kuwait. Then suddenly CNN, back then when CNN was a thing, was constantly showing images of Halabja. And Bush, the father, went on television and said, Saddam is a monster. He invaded his neighbor and he used chemical weapons. Well, who gave him the chemical weapons? Who encouraged him to invade his neighbor? This is how Western media functioned back then. This is how Western governments functioned back then. It's even worse today. Western media today is just sheer propaganda. Back then, you did have a few people in the media making sense, writing things that were half decent. Now that's all gone. It's just propaganda. But the Germans, the Europeans, the role that they played in our region today is the same as it was back then. When the Israelis invaded Iran, they supported it. In the UN Security Council, they were attacking Iran for the Israeli attack as Iran was negotiating with the United States. The IAEA, the head of the IAEA, was justifying the attack. They before the war to create this to make it legitimate. It wasn't legitimate, but to create this aura of legitimacy. So the point what I'm trying to say here is that people should look through the propaganda. The Iranians will declare, there are 3,117 deaths. 300 to 400 of them were police. Imagine if in the United States, which has a population 4 times Iran, if 1,500 police officers were killed in 2 days. What would be the response of the state?
I've been saying, Professor
I mean,
Marandi, that those numbers are wartime numbers. Those are numbers that you
oh
get in a
yes.
massive war produces these numbers. So I just want to remind
So
people
instead of,
about that.
but they instead of blaming Iran, they are the ones who should be ashamed. And then they inflate the numbers. They blame Iran and inflate the numbers
Right.
in order to help Trump. Who's trying to help Trump? Trump's opponents are trying to help Trump.
Yeah.
That's why I'm saying that the empire is the empire. When Trump, during his first term, he was despised and attacked day and night for being a Russian agent, right? And we had Russiagate. Then, when he started firing missiles into Syria, suddenly everyone was applauding him.
That's my
So
president,
killing,
is what they said. My
yes,
president.
exactly. That's
Oh, Professor.
state functions. That's how the media apparatus works. And so we should have zero expectations, but at the same time, people should resist. I think across the globe, people should boycott everything American as much as possible. I mean, there's some things I can't boycott, like X, although this new app has come out.
Upscroll, yeah.
Yeah,
Upscroll,
I
yeah.
think people should start using that and leave, what's it called? The other one I never
Seriously.
use, TikTok. I've never used TikTok before. I've already been expelled from Facebook and Instagram, so it doesn't make a difference to me. But or people should just boycott Western goods, especially American goods. Even Americans, they should, do their own thing. I've been telling that to my Venezuela friends for the last couple of months, that you should create um, a movement in Latin America for people to refrain from purchasing American goods to weaken the empire. And it's for the good of the American people. If the empire is weakened, then the United States can hopefully one day become a normal country and
Right.
start thinking about the interests of its own people.
DD Geopolitics did a good roundup of the buildup right now in the region surrounding Iran. So we, of course, have the USS Lincoln not mentioned here, but every mainstream media has been reporting on this, the aircraft carrier. But of course, fighter jets that were once in Puerto Rico are now heading to Spain. They'll eventually probably make it somewhere in the Middle East. They're also the discombobulators, the electronic warfare aircraft, the growlers, all of this is coming. And then, of course, there are murmurs of B-2 bombers, which were used in the first Iranian attack on Iran by the United States. So my question to you, Professor Marandi, is what is the mood right now in Iran? Are people afraid of war? Hold on, I don't know why it's doing this. There we go. Okay. Are people afraid right now for this war that is rapidly escalating? How are people taking? Because there's the government, which of course has a responsibility to protect and defend, and is preparing. But how are people finding the situation for themselves, given they just went through this horrible, what was a massacre by the rioters? Now, and the U.S. and Israeli-backed forces now facing a potential bombing campaign, which could be bigger than the last one. How are people taking this?
As we saw, I mean, the riots, the massacres that these rioters carried out, they were on the 8th and the 9th of January. And then on, I think, the 12th of January, if I'm not mistaken, you had the anti-riot protests, the protests in defense of the Constitution and state institutions. And they were massive. And 3 million people, up to 3 million people in Tehran participated. They were across the country. They were massive, turnouts. And I remember Musk and these people at X were trying to pretend that they weren't real, even though it was rolling coverage on different channels throughout the day. You had international media, CCTV, CGTN, RT, Al Jazeera English, Arabic, Turkish media, others were there. But most importantly, if they really had questions, there's so many satellites that are over Iran. They could have just checked the images, and I'm sure they did, and they were stunned at the amount of people on the streets across the country. So you had many, many millions of people on the streets. The country is united, but of course, War is not something that people are enthusiastic about. Some people don't believe it's going to happen. They think that Trump is not that stupid and that he is trying to get some sort of concession from Iran, which he won't. There's no way that he's going to, get any concession. He ultimately, if there is a deal, you can be sure that it'll be like in Yemen, where he'll say that he won, but it's actually something else. But some believe that he will strike, and they think that they will fail, and some are very worried. There are different, people react in different ways. But I think that people are, look with horror at how let me first say something about the Iranian diaspora and then get to what I was about to say.
Okay.
The Iranian diaspora is comprised of, let's say, two parts. One is ordinary Iranians who just went abroad to find a better uh, life and to get a better job, because Iran has been sanctioned for decades. I mean, a lot of people do well in Iran, but it can be difficult. It is difficult. The sanctions are meant for making people suffer and make people die. That has been the objective of the Europeans and Americans in Iran and elsewhere, to make kids suffer, to kids die, just like in Gaza. But in Gaza, it's more blatant and more open. You see kids freezing to death at night, during these days. But in countries like Iran, Venezuela, Cuba, there could be huge, sudden shortages of certain medicines or certain supplies that are key for factories. Factories can go bust, and then people lose their jobs and their lives become wrecked. So some people leave. But you also have a lot of people in the West who belong to these terror organizations, like the MEK. The MEK cult was in 1981 when Saddam invaded Iraq. When Saddam invaded Iran, the MEK cult in Iran declared a military uprising against the state. A foreign country is attacking, just like the rioters a couple of weeks ago. As we're, under siege from the United States, they carry out these riots. It's treacherous, but after that they left Iran and they went to Iraq and served as foot soldiers for Saddam Hussein. Right there were thousands of them. They were taken across Europe and North America, and in just one of their bases in Albania, there are like 3,000 or 4,000 of them. They are trolls. So each of them have tens of different accounts. And you can tell if you look like under some of my my tweets, you'll see like them insulting my mother or my sister or threatening my daughter, my children, or and by the way, telling X doesn't have any effect. They can threaten your life, they can threaten the lives of your loved ones, they can do whatever they want. But the point is that the comments are very similar.
Okay.
And sometimes identical. You can tell that it's someone who's very bored sitting at a keyboard and he's just, or a woman typing away and cutting and pasting. And so you have thousands of these people just in Albania and many thousands elsewhere. Then you have the monarchists who stole the country's wealth when they fled in 1979, and billions of dollars, many billions of dollars. And these people are calling for Iran to be bombed too. They have no, place among the Iranian population here. I mean, you'll find crazy people here too, who believe that Trump is good and that maybe the country should be bombed. But the population is, of course, completely opposed to this. So you have these monarchists who are many thousands, and they have a lot of their own money, and all of them get funding from the U.S. government and European governments. MEK. So they have many TV channels, websites, different organizations, think tanks. So you have thousands upon thousands of people on the payroll, and maybe tens of thousands. if you include like the Kurdish terror groups or the Wahhabi, Baluchi, ISIS, remnants, and all, when you put all these different groups together, I mean, they say there are like 300 Persian TV channels in the West. I mean, they outgun the Iranians by like 10 to 1. I don't know. I don't know how many channels they have in Iran. So, but they're all hostile. So you have all these people. So if people wonder why, and they're really crazy. I mean, the language that they bomb our country. No one. I tweeted this, I think, today. A few years ago, I was invited by the BBC for a debate in Beirut. It's a show on the BBC World Service. I forget the name of the show, but whatever. And I accepted. And but then the BBC contacted me and said that we can't invite you. AUB has at the American University of Beirut has banned you and from entering the campus. And it turns out that the State Department under Pompeo told AUB that if you allow this guy Marandi to get on campus, you'll be fined, heavily fined. That came out later. I learned from a different source. But in any case, the BBC wanted to replace me. I said, well, if you replace me, then you can't do it on the campus. And they said, no, we want to do it there. And then I told people in Lebanon, and there were some student protests, and the BBC was forced to change the place where they were carried out, and they invited. Okay, now sorry, I there was a lot of explaining there, but I want to get to the point. This debate was 1 hour, and then there was an BBC Arabic debate right after it, using the same place and the same topic. So you had Arabic speakers right after us, sitting in our chairs, having the same debate that we had, but in Arabic right after ours. So there were a lot of people from the BBC there, English and Arabic, in Beirut, and we were all sitting together and talking together. There are like 30 or 40 of them, and we were in a large circle. After the show, they were sort of celebrating that it was all over. And one of the people who worked at the BBC said that, in BBC Arabic, said, in BBC Arabic, we have people from all over the Arab world. And they all want their country to be presented in a positive light, no matter what the government's like. They want the country to be presented in a positive light on BBC Arabic. And then she said, but BBC Persian is the exact opposite. They hate Iran. And then everyone started saying, yeah, it's amazing. Like both BBC English and Arabic, the different people there who were sitting together and we were talking, they all said that these people are not normal. And then all those other channels, the infamous Iran International, which is Netanyahu's TV, right. They're even worse. So all these people, you have such a large network of people who are directly being funded by the West. And then you have the rest of the population, the diaspora, who are intimidated by them or sometimes influenced by them. But you cannot be a pro-Iranian in the West. I mean, let's say someone like me, if I was to come to the United States and I wanted a job, would they give me a job with my political views at an elementary school or at a middle school or at a high school or at a university? Of course not. So if people are wondering why is it that the voices among the diaspora are so unhinged and so hostile and so menacing, and why do they support Trump and aggression, and why do they support the Israeli regime, is because these are either from the cult of the MEK or the monarchists who for decades subjugated the people, and for the Savak, which was created by the Mossad. These are not normal people, and they are funded and they're paid to be like that. So people should not be surprised. And so the point that I'm making is that inside the country, the people are steadfast. They support the state, and we saw that in on the enormous rallies on January, I think, the 12th. but because our calendar is different, that's why I'm trying to remember what the day was. But it was on Monday, I think January the 12th. So, but outside of Iran, you have a lot of decent, ordinary Iranians, but you have this segment of the diaspora that are unhinged, and they're well paid, and that's how they make their living, and they're worse. I mean, people tell me that they're far worse. Just a couple of nights ago, an influencer did an interview with me, and she was telling me that the Cuban American population, they hate the government of Cuba, but they would never call for the bombing